"You worthless old man!" Victoria Sterling screams, her green eyes blazing with pure rage. "You can't even walk without getting in the way!" Her $500 Jimmy Choo heel crashes into the man's ribs with a sharp crack that echoes through the marble and glass lobby. The cleaning cart tips over. Bottles scatter across the floor. The man in the blue uniform staggers without saying a word. What Victoria didn't know was that she had just kicked the only man who had given her life. 20 employees stop in their tracks. Cell phones come out. Cameras focus. Fingers move across screens with desperate speed. James remains silent, picking up the spilled bottles. A tear rolls down his weathered cheek, but there's something strange in his eyes. Recognition, deep pain, and an unbreakable love she could never imagine. Victoria marches toward the elevator, her heels marking a merciless rhythm. She's 24 years old, has all the power in the world, and absolutely no idea that she just destroyed the man who loved her before she was born. The video is already uploading. The hashtags are being born. And a truth buried for decades is about to explode like a nuclear bomb in the heart of a broken family. If this story already touched your heart in this first minute, subscribe to the channel. Here you'll find stories that heal, inspire, and make you believe in human goodness again. Victoria Sterling had been born with a silver spoon in her mouth and had grown up believing the world owed her reverence. At 24, she was the heiress to the Sterling Enterprises empire, a corporation that handled everything from construction to technology, with offices in 12 countries and assets exceeding $800 million. Her adoptive father, Alexander Sterling, had raised her like a princess in a crystal tower. She had never known no as an answer. She had never felt the weight of real consequences. The world was her toy, and all the people who didn't belong to her golden circle were simply accessories, obstacles, things. That Tuesday morning, Victoria had arrived late to the board meeting. Again. Her red Porsche was poorly parked in the handicapped zone. Her heels echoed like hammer blows on the marble of the main lobby of Sterling Tower, a 40-story skyscraper that rose like a monument to power in the heart of Manhattan's financial district. James Harrison had been working as cleaning staff on the morning shift for 5 years. He arrived at 5 in the morning and left at 2 in the afternoon. He was invisible to most employees. A ghost in a blue uniform who moved through the shadows, cleaning the traces of lives that would never cross paths with his own. But that morning, while mopping near the elevators, something changed. Victoria emerged from the elevator like a hurricane of fury and French perfume. She had lost $1 million contract because she was late. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Investors were furious. And there he was, an older man working slowly, taking up her space, breathing her air. "Get out of my way!" she screamed at him, pushing him violently. James, surprised, stumbled. His cart tipped over. The cleaning products spilled, creating a puddle that smelled of ammonia and defeat. But it wasn't enough for Victoria's rage. The heel dug between his ribs. James fell to the ground, gasping. The physical pain was nothing compared to what he felt when he looked into her eyes. Those green eyes he had dreamed of for 24 years. Those eyes that were identical to Claire's, his lost love. "You're useless! A cockroach!" she kept screaming. "People like you shouldn't even breathe the same air as us." Employees were recording. Cell phones captured every second of the humiliation. The audio was recorded in high definition. Every insult, every groan of pain, every second of pure cruelty. Victoria left without looking back, leaving James on the floor, surrounded by spilled disinfectant and pitying stares. In less than an hour, the video was on all social media platforms. Millionaire daughter Jack abuse of power. Justice for James. In 4 hours, it had 2 million views. In 8 hours, national news stations were broadcasting it. At 12 hours, Victoria Sterling was the most hated woman in the country. The comments were merciless. "This is how the rich see the poor. This woman is a monster. The janitor could be her grandfather. Where are her parents? Fire her, sue her, make her pay. But nobody knew the truth. Nobody knew that James Harrison wasn't just a cleaning employee. Nobody knew that his real last name was Sterling. And absolutely nobody knew that they had just witnessed a daughter kicking her own father. Can Victoria handle what she's about to discover? The truth that will change her life forever is about to come to light. Alexander Sterling felt the world collapse beneath his feet when his assistant showed him the video. Sitting in his 40th floor office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city he had helped build, the 58-year-old man watched the screen with a mixture of horror and something deeper. Something that resembled terror. "Mr. Sterling," the assistant murmured, "we need to do something immediately. The media is—" "What did you say the employee's name was?" he interrupted with a hoarse voice. "James Harrison, sir. He's been with us for 5 years. Impeccable references. He's never had any problems." "Harrison? Are you sure?" The assistant checked the papers. "Well, it says here, oh wait, there's a note. Apparently he changed his last name a few years ago. His full original name was James Sterling Harrison." The phone slipped from Alexander's hands and fell onto the mahogany desk like a stone in a silent pond. The echo resonated in the empty office. Sterling. That last name he had tried to erase for 24 years. That last name he had bought, silenced, buried under mountains of money and legal threats. Alexander closed his eyes and memories hit him like an avalanche. Claire Harrison was 19 when he met her. She worked as a waitress in a cafe near the university. Alexander was 28 and already managing part of the family business. She was from the neighborhood. He was from high society. She was pure goodness. He was ambition without limits. They fell in love the way only those who believe love can conquer any class difference fall in love. Claire became pregnant. Alexander wanted to marry her, but his family had other plans. The Sterlings couldn't allow the empire's heir to marry some nobody from the streets. So they did what the powerful always did. They eliminated the obstacle. They told Claire that Alexander was already engaged to another woman from his same social class. They showed her fake photos, fabricated documents, paid witnesses. They convinced her that she had been just a toy for him. But the cruelest part came later. When Victoria was born, when Claire died in childbirth due to complications that could have been avoided with better medical care, the Sterling family used their influence to take custody of the baby. They told James, who had been in love with Claire since they were teenagers and had promised to raise the child as his own daughter, that he had no legal rights over her, that if he tried to claim her, he would face fabricated criminal charges, that if he approached Victoria, he would end up in prison, or worse. Alexander never knew any of this until it was too late. When he wanted to find Claire, they told him she had died. When he asked about the other man, they told him he had disappeared. They raised Victoria, telling her that her biological mother had been an upper-class woman who died in an accident, and that her biological father had been an irresponsible man who abandoned them. Alexander married another woman for convenience, but could never truly love again. He could never forget Claire, and he could never fill the void he felt every time he looked at Victoria and saw the eyes of the woman he had lost. Now, 24 years later, James had been cleaning the floors of the company that should have been partially his. He had been caring from the shadows for the daughter they had stolen from him. He had watched her grow up. He had protected her in silence, and she had just kicked him in front of the cameras of the entire world. Alexander stood up from his desk with trembling legs. He took his car keys and left the office without telling anyone anything. He had to find James. He had to face the demons he had allowed to be created almost a quarter-century ago. And he had to decide if he was brave enough to tell Victoria the truth about who her father really was. The truth that could destroy everything he had built. The truth that could save everything he had lost. But when Alexander arrives at James's house, he'll encounter something he didn't expect. A confrontation that had been waiting decades. James hadn't slept in 3 days. The video had ruined his life in ways he hadn't even imagined. He had been fired immediately. The media had found his address. Reporters were camping outside his small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, waiting for a statement he wasn't ready to give. But the worst part wasn't the job loss. It wasn't the public humiliation. It wasn't even the physical pain from his bruised ribs. The worst part was that, after 24 years of forced silence, after 24 years of loving from the shadows, his own daughter had treated him as if he were less than nothing. Sitting in his small living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes filled with memories he had never been able to share, James made the most difficult decision of his life. It was time to break the silence. Thursday morning, he arrived at Sterling Enterprises' offices dressed in his only suit, the same one he had worn to Claire's funeral 24 years ago. In his hands, he carried a rusty metal box he had kept like a treasure for more than 2 decades. Building security wouldn't let him pass, but James had worked there for 5 years. He knew every entrance, every hallway, every corner. He managed to reach the executive floor just as the monthly board meeting was beginning. Alexander was presenting the quarter's figures when the glass doors burst wide open. 15 executives in $3,000 suits turned to see the man in the worn suit carrying an old box. "James?" Alexander murmured, pale as a ghost. "Mr. Sterling," James said with a firm voice, "I think it's time everyone knew the truth." The room fell into absolute silence. Only the hum of air conditioning could be heard, and the beating of Alexander's heart echoing in his ears like a war drum. "Leave!" Alexander ordered the executives. "Everyone, now!" The executives left trailing confusion. Only Alexander, the man in the blue uniform, and Victoria remained, who had arrived late as always but was now paralyzed in the doorway. The man placed the box on the glass table. The sound of metal against glass resonated like a sentence. "Victoria," he said with a soft voice, "my real name is James Sterling Harrison, and I have something to show you." He opened the box slowly. The first object he took out was a faded photograph. A beautiful young woman with brown hair and green eyes identical to Victoria's, holding a newborn baby. "This is Claire Harrison, your biological mother, and that baby in her arms is you." Victoria approached with hesitant steps. Her hands trembled as she took the photograph. I don't understand." James took out more objects: love letters written by Claire, medical certificates from the pregnancy, a small baby bracelet with the name Victoria Sterling Harrison, photos of Claire painting a baby room in pastel colors. "Your mother loved me as I loved her," James continued, his voice breaking. "When she found out she was pregnant, we were happy. We were going to form a family. But the Sterling family couldn't allow their heir to marry a poor girl." Alexander stood motionless, tears streaming down his cheeks without trying to stop them. "They lied to Claire. They told her that Alexander was already engaged to another woman. They convinced her that she had been just an affair. When you were born and she died," James paused, swallowing hard, "they took away all my rights over you. They threatened me. They told me that if I tried to claim you, I would go to prison, or worse." The last thing he took from the box was a yellowed envelope. Inside were legal documents and a DNA test he had secretly done years ago. "For 24 years I have loved you from afar. I have worked at this company just to be close to you, to take care of you even though you couldn't know it, to make sure you were okay." He extended the documents to Victoria with trembling hands. "I am your biological father, Victoria. And 3 days ago, my own daughter kicked me like I was trash." The silence that followed was devastating. Victoria looked at the documents without being able to process what she was reading. The DNA tests were irrefutable. The photographs were real. The birth certificates matched. Everything she had believed for 24 years was a lie. Everything she had despised for 24 years had been taking care of her. The man she had humiliated in front of the entire world was the only one who had loved her unconditionally since the day she was born. Victoria collapsed into a chair, the photograph of her mother still in her hands, and began to cry like she hadn't cried since she was a child. The sound of her crying filled the empty boardroom like a lament that had been waiting 24 years to be released. The truth has come to light. But now comes the hardest part. Can Victoria forgive herself for what she did? And can a father forgive the daughter who rejected him without knowing? The following days were the darkest in Victoria's life. She locked herself in her Manhattan penthouse, disconnected her phone, and immersed herself in a spiral of guilt and self-loathing that threatened to drown her. Over and over, she replayed the video of her attack on James. Over and over, she saw the expression in his eyes when she kicked him. There was no anger, no surprise. There was only deep pain and an unbreakable love she had been too blind to recognize. She reviewed every interaction she had had with him during the 5 years he had been working at the company. She remembered how he always cleaned her office with special care, how he had left small bouquets of wildflowers on her desk that she had assumed came from the landscaping service, how she had noticed that her coffee was always at exactly the perfect temperature when she arrived in the mornings. She remembered a December morning 2 years ago when she had arrived sick to the office. She found a knitted blanket over the back of her chair and a cup of steaming chamomile tea on her desk. When she asked who it had been, they told her that the cleaning staff sometimes left small courtesies for executives. Now she knew it had been him. It had always been him. Her biological father had been taking care of her from the shadows throughout her adult life, and she had treated him as if he were invisible. On the 5th day, Victoria gathered enough courage to leave her apartment. She had found out where James lived through human resources records. She didn't take the Porsche. She didn't take the driver. She took the subway like a normal person, wearing a hooded sweatshirt and sunglasses to avoid being recognized. The neighborhood where James lived was another world. Worn brick buildings, small family businesses, children playing in the streets. It was a world she had never seen, despite having lived in the same city her entire life. She found him working in a small cafe called Safe Haven. He wore a coffee-stained apron and cleaned tables with the same meticulousness with which he had cleaned the Sterling Enterprises offices. Victoria stood in the entrance for 10 minutes watching him. He looked older, more tired. The dark circles under his eyes were deeper. But there was something different about him, a certain peace, as if he had finally been freed from a weight he had carried for decades. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, when she finally gathered the courage to approach. James looked up. For a moment, his eyes lit up with cautious hope. Then, as if remembering what had happened, his expression became neutral. "Sure," he said simply. They sat at a corner table. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and half-fulfilled dreams. There were paintings by local artists on the walls, and soft music that filled the uncomfortable silences. "I don't know how to start," Victoria murmured, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "You could start by telling me how you feel," James suggested gently. "I feel like a monster," she whispered. "I feel like I've been a monster my whole life, and I'm just now realizing it." James reached out and placed it over hers. It was the first time he had touched her as a father in 24 years. "You're not a monster, Victoria. You're the product of decisions other people made for you. You're my daughter, and I love you exactly as you are, including the mistakes you've made." "How can you say that?" she cried. "I humiliated you in front of the whole world. I kicked you like you were... Like I was what I am," James said with a sad smile. "A working man who has made mistakes. A father who couldn't protect his daughter from becoming someone she wasn't really. But you hate me, don't you? You have to hate me." James stood from his chair and walked to Victoria's side of the table. He knelt beside her, took her hands in his, and looked directly into her eyes. "Victoria Sterling Harrison," he said with a firm voice, "you are the light of my life. You are the reason I get up every morning and have been for 24 years. You are the purest love I have ever known. And there is nothing, absolutely nothing you can do that will change that. Victoria collapsed into her father's arms and cried like she had needed to cry her entire life. She cried for the lost years. She cried for the mother she never knew. She cried for the pain she had caused. And she cried for the unconditional love she had finally found. James held her as he had dreamed of doing for 24 years, gently rocking his lost girl who had finally come home. In that small neighborhood cafe, father and daughter met for the first time, and they began to heal wounds that had been bleeding for decades. Forgiveness has arrived, but now comes the most important part: how to turn this pain into something that can help others. The greatest transformation is about to begin. 3 weeks after the day that changed everything, Victoria called a general meeting in the main auditorium of Sterling Enterprises. She had worked day and night preparing what would undoubtedly be the most important speech of her life. The auditorium was packed to capacity. Employees from all levels, from executives to cleaning staff, had gathered without knowing exactly what to expect. The media was also present, their cameras focused on the podium where Victoria stood, wearing a simple black suit and no ostentatious jewelry. Beside her, in the front row, sat James. He no longer wore the blue cleaning staff uniform. He wore a dignified suit and a proud smile that illuminated the entire room. Alexander was also present, in the second row, with a mixture of nervousness and hope reflected on his face. "A month ago," Victoria began, her voice clear and firm, "I went viral for all the wrong reasons. Many of you saw the video where I physically attacked an employee of this company, where I insulted him, humiliated him, and treated him as if he were less than human." A murmur ran through the auditorium. The cameras kept rolling. What I didn't know at that moment is that this man is my biological father. James Sterling Harrison, the man I kicked in front of all of you, is the man who gave me life. The murmur became absolute silence. Even the reporters stopped taking notes for a moment. For 24 years, my father worked humble jobs while I grew up in a palace of privilege. For 5 years, he cleaned these offices while I occupied them, as if they were my personal kingdom. Throughout my life, he loved me from the shadows while I despised people like him. Victoria paused, took a deep breath, and continued. "Today I am here to make 3 announcements that will forever change how this company operates." She took a folder of documents from the podium. First, starting today, Sterling Enterprises will establish the Claire Harrison Fund with an initial budget of $50 million. This fund will provide complete university scholarships for children of cleaning, security, maintenance, and general services employees from all our companies worldwide. Spontaneous applause filled the auditorium. Victoria waited for it to calm down. Second, we will implement the Human Dignity Protocol in all our facilities. Any employee, regardless of their hierarchical level, who disrespects, humiliates, or mistreats another employee will be immediately fired. There will be no exceptions. There will be no privileges. Human dignity is non-negotiable. The applause was louder this time. Several cleaning and security employees had tears in their eyes. And third, I am proud to announce that James Sterling Harrison will be appointed Executive Director of the new Hidden Roots program, an initiative that will identify and support talented employees who have been overlooked due to their socio-economic position. This time, the ovation was deafening. James stood from his seat, walked to the podium, and hugged his daughter in front of everyone. The cameras captured every second of the embrace that had taken 24 years to happen. But Victoria wasn't finished. "I want you to understand something," she continued, her voice now stronger. "These aren't just corporate programs designed to clean up our image. These are sacred commitments. Commitments born from the deepest pain and the most authentic transformation." She took an additional document from her folder. "I also announced that I am renouncing my executive salary. All those millions will be redirected to the Claire Harrison Fund. I don't need that money to live, but there are thousands of families who do need an opportunity to survive and prosper." A murmur of surprise ran through the auditorium. Even the most cynical reporters looked at each other with expressions of amazement. Furthermore, I want you to know that during the next few weeks, I will be personally visiting every cleaning, security, and maintenance employee in all our facilities. Not to take publicity photos, but to listen to their stories, learn about their needs, and ensure that every person working at this company knows they are valued. Victoria paused and looked directly at the cameras. To all the people watching this, if you have ever worked humble jobs, if you have ever felt invisible, if you have ever felt that your worth as a human being depended on how much money you had in the bank, I want you to know you are wrong. Her voice broke slightly, but she continued with determination. The most valuable man I have ever met spent 5 years cleaning floors. The most dignified person I know wears a work uniform and arrives at his job before dawn. The purest heart I have seen beats in the chest of someone society taught to be invisible. The cleaning employees present were crying openly. Some hugged each other. Others simply stood with their hands over their hearts, as if they were hearing a hymn. But more important than all these announcements, Victoria said, her voice breaking with emotion, I want to publicly apologize to every person I have hurt with my arrogance. I want to apologize to every employee who felt invisible because of me. And especially, I want to apologize to the man who taught me that true love has nothing to do with money or power, but with silent sacrifice and unconditional kindness. She turned toward James. Dad, she said, and that word resonated throughout the auditorium like a church bell. I'm sorry it took me so long to meet you, but I promise that I will spend the rest of my life making sure no other child has to grow up without knowing their true parents because of social class differences. James stepped up to the podium and took the microphone with trembling hands. I also have something to say, he murmured, his voice amplifying throughout the auditorium. For 24 years, I have observed this company from below. I have seen how decisions are made. I have seen how people are treated. I have seen the faces of families who depend on these jobs. He paused, looking at employees from all levels. I promise that in my new position, every decision I make will be thinking about the people who have the least voice. Every policy I implement will be designed to lift up those who have been stepped on. And every day I will work to ensure that this company doesn't just generate wealth, but generates dignity. Alexander also stepped onto the stage. With a trembling voice, he apologized for past mistakes and announced that he would be transferring part of his executive responsibilities to Victoria and James to ensure that the company reflected the values of justice and human dignity that had been missing for so long. I also want to confess something, Alexander said, tears flowing freely down his cheeks. For years I was complicit in a system that separated this family. Out of fear, social pressure, and cowardice, I allowed a terrible injustice to be committed. I cannot change the past, but I can work to ensure the future is different. He took a legal document from his pocket. I am establishing a legal trust that guarantees that if something like this happens again in our family or company, there will be immediate protections for those affected. No one else should suffer what James and Victoria have suffered. When the speeches ended, something extraordinary happened. The employees didn't leave immediately. They stayed, talking to each other. Executives talking with cleaning staff. Secretaries hugging security guards. The rigid hierarchy that had defined the company for decades dissolved in that moment. Maria Rodriguez, a 50-year-old cleaning woman, approached the podium with hesitant steps. "Can I say something?" she asked timidly. Victoria immediately extended the microphone to her. I have worked here for 12 years, Maria said, her voice trembling. In all those years, no one ever asked my name. Until last week, when Miss Victoria came to personally apologize to me for the video. She paused, wiping away tears. I want you to know that what happened today, this changes everything. For people like us, this means our children will have opportunities we never had. It means we can dream bigger. Other employees began sharing their stories. Carlos, the night security guard who had been saving for 8 years to send his son to college. Rosa, the woman who cleaned the executive bathrooms and had been caring for her sick mother on minimum wage. Pedro, the gardener who had developed innovative methods for plant maintenance but had never had the opportunity to share his ideas. Each story was a reminder of how much talent and potential had been ignored by a system that only valued college degrees and family connections. That day, Sterling Enterprises didn't just change its policies, it changed its soul. And in the months that followed, the impact was felt far beyond corporate offices. Other companies began implementing similar programs. Universities created scholarships inspired by the Claire Harrison Fund. And the story of Victoria and James became a symbol that it's never too late to do the right thing. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of the small house that had been converted into the operations center of Hidden Roots. The walls were covered with photographs, students graduating from universities, families receiving keys to new houses, employees being promoted to executive positions. In the center of the main room, a rustic wooden table served as a shared desk. James, now 59 years old, reviewed scholarship applications with reading glasses that gave him a distinguished air. His hair had turned completely gray, but his eyes shone with a vitality that had been dormant for decades. Victoria, now 29 years old, sat on the other side of the table, talking on the phone with an immigrant family whose children had just received full scholarships to study engineering. The organization had grown beyond their most ambitious dreams. In 5 years, they had awarded more than 1,000 scholarships, helped 500 families buy their first homes, and created a mentorship program that had transformed the lives of thousands of people. But more important than the numbers was what had happened between father and daughter. They had become an inseparable team. James contributed life wisdom and genuine connection with the communities they served. Victoria contributed resources, business connections, and a fierce determination to make up for the lost years. "Dad," Victoria said, hanging up the phone, "do you remember what you told me about making apple pie?" James smiled. During one of their first lunches together, he had told her how Claire used to make apple pie on Sundays and how he had dreamed of teaching his daughter the recipe someday. "Why? Are you hungry?" "Not exactly," Victoria said, pointing toward the door. "There's someone I want you to meet." An 8-year-old girl entered the office shyly. It was Maria, daughter of one of the cleaning employees they had helped the previous year. Her parents had gotten better-paying jobs thanks to the training program, and now the girl came every day after school to do her homework in the office. "Maria wants to learn to cook apple pie like her grandmother," Victoria explained. "And I thought maybe you could teach us both." James's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in 24 years, he was going to teach his daughter his mother's recipe. "Of course, my love," he said, extending his hand toward Maria. "Let's go to the kitchen." The small kitchen at the back of the office filled with laughter and flour flying through the air. James taught with infinite patience, his big hands guiding Maria's small hands, while Victoria took notes as if she were learning the most important secret in the universe. "Your mom, Claire, used to say that apple pies are made with love, not haste," James told Victoria as they kneaded together. "Each fold should carry a wish. Each filling should carry hope." "What wish do we put in these?" Maria asked, her little eyes shining with curiosity. James looked at Victoria, then at Maria, and smiled with a peace that had taken decades to find. "We put the wish that no child grows up without knowing who their family is, that no father has to love from the shadows, and that no daughter has to live without knowing where she comes from." While the apple pies baked in the oven, the three sat at the small kitchen table. Maria drew in her notebook. Victoria reviewed documents from new aid applications. James simply watched them with a smile that seemed to embrace the whole world. The golden light of evening entered through the window, bathing them all in a warm glow. Outside, the city continued its accelerated pace, but inside that small kitchen, time had stopped at the perfect moment. "Dad," Victoria murmured, without looking up from her papers. Do you think Mom would be proud? James reached out and took his daughter's hand. I think your mom is proud every day. Every time you help a family. Every time you give an opportunity to someone the world had forgotten. Every time you choose love over hate. Maria looked up from her drawing. Can I teach this recipe to my little brother? Of course, James and Victoria said at the same time, and then they laughed. The oven timer sounded. The apple pies were ready. James carefully took them out, golden and perfect. The aroma filled the entire office, reaching where other employees worked at their desks. One by one, they began to approach, attracted by the smell and laughter. In a few minutes, the small kitchen had become an impromptu gathering. Employees, program beneficiaries, visitors, all sharing apple pie and stories. It was like a big family that had found their home. Victoria observed the scene and felt a deep peace filling her chest. 5 years ago, she had been alone in a crystal tower, surrounded by luxuries but empty of true love. Now she was in a small, simple kitchen, surrounded by people who loved her for what she had chosen to be, not for what she had inherited. Sometimes, the greatest love hides behind silence, she murmured, remembering the words James had told her the first time they talked in the cafe. And forgiveness is the most beautiful way to start over. James heard her and smiled. And sometimes, he added, watching Maria teach another child how to fold the pie crust, the most painful stories become the greatest blessings. As they watched the children from the scholarship program playing in the small backyard garden of the foundation, Victoria reflected on the path they had traveled. You know what's strangest about all this? She asked James. For years, I thought I had everything a person could want. Money, power, respect. But I was completely empty inside. James nodded, remembering his own years of emptiness. Money can buy comfort, but it can't buy purpose. Power can generate obedience, but it can't generate authentic love. Now, when I wake up every morning, Victoria continued, I know exactly why I'm alive. Every scholarship we award, every family we reunite, every employee we promote. It's like I'm giving life back to years that felt like death. In the 5 years that had passed, the Claire and James Foundation had awarded more than 2,000 college scholarships, helped more than 500 families reunite after forced separations due to economic problems, and created dignified jobs for more than 10,000 people. But beyond the statistics, they had changed the cultural narrative about social class and human dignity. Their story had inspired documentaries, books, and a global movement of companies adopting more inclusive practices. Look at this, Victoria said, showing James an envelope that had just arrived. It was a letter from a woman in Chicago whose son had received a scholarship inspired by the Claire Harrison program that a local company had implemented after learning their story. Thank you for proving that a father's love can change the world, the letter said. My son will be the first in our family to go to college, and it all started with your story of forgiveness and transformation. James couldn't hold back the tears. Every letter like this was confirmation that the pain they had lived through had not been in vain. Claire is watching all this, he murmured. I'm sure she's proud of the woman you've become. Victoria hugged her father, breathing in the aroma of homemade apple pie that she now associated with home, family, and true love. You know what my favorite part of all this is? She asked him. What? That I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. For the first time in my life, I am exactly who I want to be. I am the daughter of Claire Harrison and James Sterling, and that's enough. The camera slowly pulls away from the lit window, where father and daughter share apple pie with their chosen family, while the city lights twinkle like earthly stars. On the table next to Maria's drawing, there's a framed photograph, Claire Harrison smiling, her green eyes bright with happiness holding her newborn baby. Next to the photo, there's a small sign made by the program's children. Here lives the love that never dies. The sound of children's laughter fills the air as more families arrive for the weekly community dinner. Employees who were once invisible now share tables with former executives. Children who once believed college was impossible now plan their professional careers. In one corner, Alexander helps an immigrant grandfather with his grandson's residency documents. Maria Rodriguez, now director of community programs, organizes the week's activities. Carlos, the former night guard, now corporate security coordinator, reviews protection protocols for vulnerable families. Each person in that room carries with them a story of transformation, second chances, restored dignity. And at the center of it all, James and Victoria continue weaving the threads of a new narrative. One where love is stronger than classism, where forgiveness is more powerful than resentment, and where it's never too late to start over. Finally, after 24 years, the family is complete. But more than that, they have created an extended family that includes everyone who once felt alone, invisible, or worthless. They have proven that true love knows no social class boundaries. And they have shown that sometimes the most beautiful endings are born from the most painful beginnings. This story teaches us that true love doesn't always come with fanfare and grand declarations. Sometimes it comes in silence, in small gestures, in sacrifices nobody sees. It teaches us that it's never too late to recognize our mistakes, to ask for forgiveness, and to start over. But most importantly, it reminds us that we all carry within us the capacity to transform our pain into purpose, our mistakes into wisdom, and our regret into a force that can change the world. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that there's always a second chance to make things right. Subscribe for more stories that heal, inspire, and restore our faith in human goodness. Because at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to find our way home. And sometimes home isn't a place. It's a person who never stopped loving us, even when we didn't know they were there.